Welcome back to another episode of ROC Boys Football. We officially have our Week 14 college football playoff rankings. Honestly, there's only really two big storylines. I'm not too concerned with anything outside of the top six. That was kind of the big story was what is going to stack up Ohio State, Alabama. Before we really start talking about what this looks like again, I just want to say thank you guys for the support that you guys have shown the channel. Again, if you like talking ball, consider subscribing. We appreciate the support. We love talking ball with you guys in the comments section. So again, if you do enjoy it, consider subscribing to the channel. We really appreciate it. Dale, I'm going to kick it off to you. Let's start with that Ohio State, Alabama 5 and 6 rankings. What are your early thoughts on that here?
I honestly would have been stunned if they put Alabama above Ohio State, because when you look at what Alabama's done, they really have no impressive wins, and they've got two losses that frankly don't look that great at this point in the season. I mean, LSU dropping a bad one to A&M, Tennessee dropping a bad one,
South Carolina.
and I don't know, what does Alabama prove? Like, the best win is maybe Ole Miss. That's not a great win.
Yeah, I guess the argument, or I think the real reason Ohio State comes in at 5 over Alabama is they have a win over number 8 Penn State at home, like in Happy Valley, in a pretty decisive win. To be honest, I was a little bit surprised that you saw Ohio State at 5 and Alabama at 6, just because the committee loves the SEC. Now, resume speaking, Ohio State's one loss comes to the number 2 team in the country in Michigan. Although it was ugly, they still probably have the better win than Alabama. I guess the big argument for me with Alabama is both those losses to LSU and Tennessee both came on the road, and they were both very, very close games where those games both could have either gone either way.
But they're not hammer teams. They're not like the greatest teams in the world. Tennessee,
yes,
that's a tough game. But LSU, like that's a pretty bad loss, I'd say, because LSU, as much as their record, and yeah, they're going to win the SEC West, but I don't know. They haven't been wildly impressive at any point in the season besides the win over Bama. That's the only thing that looks any good.
And you take a look at the eyeball test. It's hard to argue that Alabama's look like that good of a team. I know a lot of people, including myself, picked them to win the national championship this year. But in terms of how they looked on the field, again, there's a team that almost lost to Texas A&M. Like, this team really, really struggled at some points in the season. I get maybe they were kind of coming into form towards the end of the year, but it's really hard to kind of put Alabama over Ohio State when Ohio State only has one loss versus Alabama's 2. Their one loss is to a much superior team than Alabama's 2 losses were. And they have the better win as they went on the road and beat a Penn State team that went on the road to Auburn and smoked them. So you have that like Big Ten SEC crossover. Now getting into what could happen this week. I guess we could touch on the Georgia-Michigan. You guys know we rock with Michigan, but it's really hard. I saw some Michigan fans saying we should be number 1. In my mind, it's really hard to argue that Georgia's not the number 1 team in the country.
Yeah, and I know people are like, no, can't go back in history and all that, but like it's hard to ignore the fact that last year in the playoffs they did beat the brakes off Michigan,
and Georgia's looked awesome.
It's like what has Georgia shown to prove they're not the number 1 team? They've been really good all year. They've had primarily dominant wins. And just like Michigan, yeah, they've looked like they've had some close ones with teams that shouldn't have been close. Illinois with Michigan, Mizzou with Georgia. But that happens. But when they go play the big dogs, they beat the brakes off them. So I'm fine with Georgia at 1.
And as a Michigan fan, we can touch on this a little bit because I know we have a decent amount of Michigan listeners. Like, give me the number 2 spot, because if TCU or USC lose, you're playing Ohio State, and Ohio State's a team I'd rather not play, even though we just went on the road and beat them handily. I'd rather play TCU than Ohio State again. And TCU, I think, is probably the weakest team in the top 4 right now, and I get they're 12-0 and all they do is win, but it's really hard to argue that they've looked that good of a team throughout their 12 games here.
Yeah, I mean, that's, to me, I'm not gonna lie. If TCU, I don't see how they get bumped out of this playoff picture.
That was my next question.
Not fair to have Ohio State and Alabama both sitting on the bench this weekend, jump them from a TCU team that's like, well, then why even try to make a conference championship game? That, I don't know, it would feel like unfair to me, because those teams, again, I don't think they've put good enough seasons together. to warrant themselves jumping. I mean, maybe if Ohio State looked a little tougher against Michigan and you thought like, oh, that was wire to wire and Michigan had Blake Corum and some of those things, but they just didn't. And I don't know, to punish TCU at this point would be unfair. I think.
I disagree.
Why?
And TCU hasn't looked good. I get they've won, and there's an argument to say like they've won, but if you're not going to look that good, you need to win, and you need to continue winning. And you
They
can't
have won. They've won more than anyone else besides the top two.
And then so like my second question would be is still TCU versus Ohio State neutral site. Who's winning that football game? And you're out of your mind if you're answering TCU.
I guess, but that I don't know. I don't think I think it to punish TCU at this point to lose in the Big 12 game while Ohio State and Alabama are sitting home, I think is, I don't know. It's kind of an odd precedent. I think USC is a different conversation because if they lose twice to Utah, then it's like, well, Utah should just be in it or somebody else. Because
like I think Ohio State, if TCU or USC loses, and that was the big deal about these rankings were who's going to be 5 and who's going to be 6. So if one of these two teams lose, I think Ohio State moves up to 4. One, the money's going to be there. Like if we're talking about like practical aspects of the business side of it, Ohio State's fan base is a lot heavier of a weight than a USC or TCU. Now, second, my opinion on the Big 12 is I don't think it's that good of a conference. I think it's a bunch of solid teams. Like I think it's a deep conference where you look at that Big 12 conference and like Kansas and Duke played a very close matchup. Like Kansas ends up beating Duke, who went at 8-4 in the ACC. But you look at the top teams in the Big 12 and like how good is the Big 12? Kansas State lost to Tulane. I don't think the Big 12, and that's big. The Kansas State's like the pretty much consensus number 2 team in the Big 12, and I don't think Kansas State is that great of a team. You look at the Big 10, like Penn State is an absolute. I really think Penn State's a true top 8 team in the country.
Yeah, there's 3 heavyweights for sure. We all know that, but I don't know. So that's a tough call. I think that's a tough call to knock TCU out, especially if they lose like a nail biter to a Kansas State team when, I don't know, Ohio State's not going to do anything to add to their resume or their potential. I think I don't know. You're probably right because like if I were to bet TCU at Ohio State neutral site, I'd go.
I'm taking Ohio State minus 6.5 at the least. Like they're a touchdown favorite.
And that's probably how you're probably right. That's probably how you got to do it. I don't. It just feels like it's like then the TCU should forfeit it and just sit there. And
it's also not how you're supposed to do it. Like I don't think I think the college football committees like I think they try to purely look at the resume. What have you done, as opposed to like what are the power rankings? What does Vegas have you at? This is a little bit of a college football fan coming out of me. Like if TCU loses, I don't want to see Georgia versus TCU, a 1 Georgia versus a 4 TCU. I want to see a 1 Georgia versus a 4 Ohio State, and then give me a Michigan 2 versus a USC 3. And then if both TCU and USC lose, or they're both like it's kind of a pick 'em for both of them, I would probably want to see Georgia 1, Michigan 2, and then do you get
no, you can't throw Bama in there.
Well, but like, what if they both lose? What is your top 4 if USC and TCU lose? Does TCU stay in there with over a 2-loss Bama?
Probably, honestly, but like
I don't
think Bama's great this year. I mean, they play Texas razor tight. TCU really kind of spanked Texas pretty good. I mean, I get the score.
That's a good argument.
But it was pretty much 17-3 by the end of it. And
TCU was handled business against Texas.
And that had Quinn Ewers, and I don't know. I would have a trouble in a sense putting Ohio State in over a 1-loss TCU team who went 12-1 rather than 11-1, but I can't even fathom putting Bama in at this point with 2 losses. Like the SEC West just isn't good enough right now. It's just not.
Okay, now I'm just going to ask you, and we'll leave on this. I kind of told you what I want to see. As a Michigan fan, this is what I want to see as a Michigan fan. I want to see Georgia 1, Michigan 2, and then realistically, I hope TCU wins and we get them because I think they're the weakest top 4 team. And then I'd want to see Ohio State, Georgia.
I'm kind of with you because I don't think anyone wants to see Caleb Williams. He's just really good, and he's a guy who's capable. Looks like right now of beating anybody. Just putting his.
I also don't. I think who do you think's a better team, Ohio State or USC?
I think Ohio State would be a favorite.
Yes, I agree. So like I want to see the better team play Georgia. Like I think Georgia, Ohio State's one of the few teams that really I think could push Georgia. I think USC, quite frankly, could push Georgia around a little bit, or like challenge Georgia, not push them around, but challenge them in ways. I think if you see a Georgia USC, I think Georgia just runs the football all over USC, and I think their defensive line and backers are just too athletic to let Caleb Williams. Like the problem with Notre Dame, when you go back and watch that USC game, is Notre Dame just didn't have enough speed at the defensive line and linebacker spot to deal with Caleb Williams. And Caleb Williams is just running around those guys. Like JT Bertrand, as good as he is, like he can't hold Caleb Williams.
Yeah, that's
Can't
true.
deal with Caleb Williams. I was going to say something a little bit more inappropriate. So I think Georgia smokes USC. And so I want to see a Georgia, Ohio State. I think many people know I'm not a huge USC fan. So like
everyone besides USC fans are USC fans right now.
Yeah, I think as a football fan, a college football fan, and a Michigan fan, I want to see Michigan play TCU, then give us a national championship berth, and give me that Georgia Ohio State matchup because that will be a very fun one. I think I
don't know. You're probably right. It does have to be if TCU loses. You're right. Ohio State's 4.
Who is your right now? What are your top 4 teams in the country? Like not resume based. Well, a little resume.
I think TCU is number 3 or 4. And then probably. I don't know. I think Ohio State's probably better than USC, but
I think resume based or not resume based. Like if
TCU's good personally.
I don't know if they're a top 4 team for me. And I like trust me, we're the biggest TCU fans. Like we've picked them a lot. They've covered for us a lot. And I really do like TCU, and I think they're criminally underrated by Vegas. But if you're asking me for the 4 best teams in the country, Georgia 1, Michigan 2, and then I'm probably going Ohio State 3 and Bama 4. And so
making it out of the Big 12 is impressive because again, it doesn't have the heavies of like the Georgia, Michigans.
You don't have off weeks.
Everybody's tough.
Yeah, like that's fair.
Kansas State would scrape, I think, Illinois. Yeah. And Illinois is like probably the 4th best team in the conference.
We didn't get to see many like some of those cross conference ones. That's what's kind of exciting, and I wish bowl season was a little bit more. I wish some of those middle tier teams like took it a little bit more serious, where you would see like an Illinois versus Kansas State or a Penn State versus Clemson, and you really get a sense of like how do these like top teams from cross conferences match up, and you get a little sense of like how good is each conference, because when they're all playing each other, it's kind of hard to decipher. We're gonna jump on Sunday, obviously, to talk about the final college football playoff rankings, talk about some of the matchups in the playoffs and the bowl games. But that's what we got for you for our top 4. This is gonna be I can't wait for the weekend. Like I think there are some serious like this TCU Kansas State game and USC Utah game are gonna be great games, and they're gonna mean a lot. They're going to mean an absolute lot, and I'm very, very excited for it. So that'll do it from the boys. Again, we do appreciate all the support you guys have shown the channel. Again, if you do like the content, consider subscribing, and we'll talk to you guys later.